for God in introducing order and complexity and law into the affairs of material reality. And I think those are decisions individual scientists should make themselves. But what's happened is that the supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution are now in the majority in the scientific world. Those who are proposing alternatives are very much in the minority. They are there, however. But the majority has used its influence with government to get the alternatives excluded from the education systems. From time to time, people in a city or a state or a region will try to get alternatives to evolution in these science classrooms. They will do this through local school boards, state school boards, district school boards. And whenever they try to do that, the supporters of the theory of evolution will get a federal lawsuit that will overturn these attempts to get alternatives into the classrooms. And I think that's very bad for a democratic, free society.
Is it?
Yes, it is, because, first of all...
No, I mean, do you think it's a democratic, free society if there's an entire lockdown on knowledge?
Well, that's right. I mean, if it's allegedly a democratic, free society, then we wouldn't tolerate our government telling us we could only buy one kind of car, or we could only listen to one radio station, or only worship God according to the tenets of one religion. But we're allowing the government now to give a monopoly to a group of scientists.
So it's all about funding, really. It's about being able to perpetuate the funding, towing the line, right?
Yes.
And if you don't do that, then you're not getting funded or you're being released from university teaching.
That's correct. And if you're proposing any alternative, you're not going to be allowed to do it. That's just the way things are now. And I think the better policy would be that the alternative should be there. I would say, okay, let's admit today most scientists accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. That's a fact. All right. But it's also a fact there are some researchers who don't support that theory. This is also a fact. So I would say, all right, if you're going to have a biology textbook, give the majority of pages in it to the Darwinian theory of evolution, but some percentage of the pages should be given to those who are opposed to that theory and who are proposing alternatives. And this should be done in a neutral, objective way. And then let students make up their own minds about these things. I think that would be better than the current system of just giving whoever the majority is the right to exclude all the other ideas from the curriculum. And I would also extend that also to the grant, the government money that's going to fund scientific research and positions in state-supported universities. And I'm talking here, when I'm talking about the education system and professorships and grant money, I'm talking about the public, state and government-supported education systems, universities, and grant-giving agencies. I would say if somebody wants to have a private school where they raise their own money and want to teach their own ideas, that's fine. Say if the supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution want to raise their own money and have their own private schools where they teach only their ideas, that's fine. Or if there's some denominations, religious denominations that want to have their private schools and teach only their ideas, that's fine with me. If they're atheists that want to have their own schools and teach only atheistic ideas, fine. But when we're talking about the public school systems that are taking money from all the people, tax money from all the people, and when we're talking about universities, state universities that are operating on tax money and federal money, when we're talking about scientific grant-giving institutions that are distributing tax money from all the people, I think they have an obligation to represent the diversity that's actually there in the scientific world and among the general public. They shouldn't be allowed to give all the grant money to just one group of scientists. They shouldn't allow all the professorships to go to this one group. They shouldn't allow the curriculum to be determined in the public schools by this one group, even though they're the majority. I think there has to be kind of a scientific bill of rights, to protect the rights of the minorities in these cases.
One of the things I'm excited about with archaeology is that you're in this forensic realm of evidence. But I know that in the book you talked about how there are people who fake discoveries. What do you do about that? Or what is being done about that?
Well, people can fake discoveries, but that doesn't, just like people can counterfeit money, but that doesn't mean that all money is counterfeit.
Right.
So yes, there have been hoaxes in the history of archaeology. For example, there was Piltdown Man, which was one of the supposed missing links that was discovered in England in the early 20th century. And it was in the textbooks for 50 years before it was discovered it was a hoax. What the discovery was, it was a human-like skull and an ape-like jaw that were put together. Said, okay, this is half man, half ape. This is a missing link between apes and humans. So it was given as proof of evolution for years and years and years until it was finally discovered that it was a very elaborate hoax by someone with a very high level of scientific training to do that, to make this ape jaw look like a fossil jaw, to make the skull look like it was a fossil, and bury them and discover them and publish them in the scientific literature. So that turned out to be a hoax. But here's another thing that can happen. Anytime that there is some discovery, some genuine discovery that contradicts the theory of evolution, they can just simply say, oh, it's a hoax. It must be a hoax. There have been hoaxes. This has to be a hoax. And I think that is not a very scientific way in which to proceed.
It sounds like a lot of the field is extremely irrational, along with the theory of evolution. There's an irrationality with it. Why do you think that's so? And do you think that's so?
In some cases, yes. There are all kinds of scientists. Some are more rational than others. I've found in my dealings that the scientific world can be, broken into three basic groups. The first I would call the fundamentalist evolutionist. And I believe they accept that theory not for purely scientific reasons, but because it confirms their prior belief in atheism and materialism. That's what I think. It's more like an ideology for them, and they don't want to hear any criticism of the theory of evolution. They don't want to hear anything I have to say about it. They don't want anybody to hear what I have to say about it. So, yes, there is a kind of irrationality in that group. And there is another group, a larger group, who may presently be supporters of the current theories, but at least they're open-minded enough to be willing to listen to alternatives. I think that's an important first step, because if ideas are going to change, people have to be willing to listen to new ideas and evidence that contradicts the current ideas. So that's another group who I think are more or less rational. And then among that group, there are a very small group who have actually changed their ideas and come to accept some alternatives to the current Darwinian theory of evolution. They're very small in number these days, but that's how these things work. When Darwin first started promoting his idea, he was in the minority. So sometimes these things happen.
I like also in your book how you talk about how there's always a bias. Nobody comes in totally neutral, and that you have to be upfront about your bias. What is your bias?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Everybody does have a point of view, a perspective, which should be acknowledged.